And I want to start things off with an easy one. Block the leading player. The game uses dice, which makes it broken on luck based. However, the creator of the game also implemented the robber mechanic, so players with a lucky start can still be caught. But to use the robber right, you need to block the player who's in the lead. Which brings us to tip number 2. Figure out who is the perceived leader. This can be done in two ways and they're both important. Number 1. Look at the board and determine who has the best chance of winning. And number 2. Ask the other players who they think is in the lead. Especially the second way is great, because you know where their next block is likely going to be. If it's going to be a spot you need to be open, you had better get some development cards. But maybe tip 3 is even more effective. Influence others. If the other players think you're in the lead and the closest to winning, they're going to rob you. So unless it's super obvious, try to influence others into thinking someone else is in the lead. On the screen I have some effective sentences for how you can do this. The main objective with all of them is convincing the robbing player how not blocking the player you want to be blocked is bad. Something that's not considered to be bad is giving a higher value to ore and wheat than to the other resources. This is tip number 4, and people with high win rates pretty much all agree ore and wheat are the most important resources. Here's why. Some of the strongest plays are building cities and buying development cards, and both require ore and wheat. Cities only cost 5 resources and double the production on one of your strongest spots. The cost is 5, while the benefit can be 20 plus cards over the course of the game. On the other hand, development cards can be used for many handy purposes. Tip number 5. Look at supply and demand. One of the most fun things to do in Settlers of Catan is predicting how trades will go down over the course of the game. A major factor into predicting this is supply and demand. If wood has great numbers, there will most likely be a lot of wood in the game, which means there is a lot of supply. Wood and brick are used in a 1-for-1 ratio for both roads and settlements. So if there is a lot of wood, brick becomes more valuable, and that's what creates demand. So if there is a lot of wood, build your settlements on brick. You get to know if there is a lot of wood in the game by hand tracking, which is tip number 6. Tracking your opponent's resource cards can be used to your advantage in a lot of ways. If you know what resources are in hand at the moment, you know what resources others lack as well. You can use this to your advantage. By offering the resource another player lacks, you can try to make a great trade out of it. Hand tracking can also be used very well to determine who to rob and who to block. You see, if you know what cards are out there, you know what cards you can snipe. But you also know how to prevent your opponents from executing their game plan. On a side note, I've uploaded full guides on hand tracking and how to use the robber effectively on patreon.com/Tricosaurus. If you know how to hand track, you can make a lot more trades, which is tip number 7. Do as many trades as possible. With this advice, I'd still like to say you shouldn't disable your critical thinking, but here's the catch. There are 4 players in the game and 2 of them improve their position in game. One of them is you. So with trading, you take an advantage over 2 of your competitors, and if you master the critical game aspect trading, you give yourself the best odds of winning. Keep in mind though, you don't want others to take more advantage than you do. To make sure you're the main target for trade offers, we take a look at tip number 8. If someone offers a trade, be the first to reply. When you're the first to reply, people often see you as the main trade target, and they will focus their attention on you. Positive side effect is other players often back out when they see your offering already. My advice is to know as often as you can what cards you want to gain and what cards you don't mind trading away. If you don't know what your plan is, no worries. When someone offers a trade, start by saying, I don't know, but it's an interesting offer. Can I think about it real quick? So you give yourself the opportunity to think of what you want or don't want to trade, or to come up with a counter offer yourself. Which brings us to tip number 9. Become unblockable. Besides how being robbed and blocked can be a painful experience, it's also bad for your resource gain. Therefore, becoming unblockable is essential to your game. To become unblockable, we first need to know where blocks take place. These are the main 3 criteria. 1. It involves the perceived leader. 2. The preferable block is going to be on an 8 or 6 or else a 5 or a 9. And 3. The block is going to happen preferably at a spot with multiple players who have no development cards. Okay, let's take a look at the first one. You either don't want to be in the lead, or you want to influence the other player someone else is in the lead. You also want to predict what 8s and 6s will be settled on by 2 or more players. It is fairly often better to build on a 10 and a 4 ore than to build on the 8 ore by itself, because the 8 gets blocked. Okay, let's move on to tip number 10. Make a 10-point plan. A 10-point plan works as follows. You make a prediction of what cities, settlements, win conditions and additional victory points you're able to collect and build in the lowest number of turns. This plan needs to reach 10 victory points, obviously, so you can win the game as fast as possible. I usually start making my 10-point plan after I established my basic resource gain, which often is the case when I have 4 resource gaining victory points, so I only look at cities and settlements in which the city counts as 2 victory points. You also want your 10-point plan to work well with your resource gain. If you don't gain any sheep, it's in most cases better to go for 4 cities and the longest road than to use development cards to minimize the amount of sheep needed. Vital part to your 10-point plan is the choice between win conditions, which brings us to tip number 11, take the opposing win condition. In 2019, a skilled Settlers of Catan player who is in King of Catan called Or and Tulava did research on the link between the bonuses from the longest road, largest army, having neither or having both, and winning the game. Of the 100 researched games, 69 of them were won by the player who had one of the 2 win conditions. My idea is that you have the best odds of winning if you focus on one of the 2 win conditions, instead of 2 or none. Because it is common to block your win condition competitor, my advice is to focus on the win condition the fewest number of players is going for. So if many players are building roads, go for development cards. Moving on to tip number 12. Predict your opponent's placements. Predicting your opponent's initial settlement placements can be pretty tough. I still invite you to do so because the reward is definitely worth it. To predict opponent's placements, I use a 3-step plan, which I explain more carefully in my video about initial settlement placements, which is linked in the description. I'll be going over it briefly in this one. Step 1 consists of determining the rarest resource, by adding up the amount of pips, the numbers for each resource combined. On this board, wheat has the numbers 5, 9, 10 and 2, which adds up 4, 4, 3 and 1 amount of pips. After you've done that for the 5 resources, we move into step number 2, in which you locate the 6s, the 8s, the 9s and the 5s. You also check if they're located next to each other. Step number 3 is predicting which spots will be placed on based on your board analysis of the rarest resources and the best numbers. You also predict the order of which the spots will be picked and by who. I also have a very special bonus tip for you. Use 3-for-1 boards. My preference for using a 3-for-1 board over a 2-for-1 board is based on 2 concepts. Although with a 2-for-1 board trades cost 1 less than with a 3-for-1 board and is therefore more efficient, it sacrifices flexibility. In Settlers of Catan, you never know what number gets rolled next, which makes being able to adjust to an uncertain future very important. There's also less risk of being blocked, because when you rely on, for example, a 2-for-1 sheep board, you likely have a lot of sheep resource gain. Blocking the sheep is therefore an effective block. When players block, they want some guarantee it's an effective and good block. So on the 2-for-1 board relying player gets blocked. On the other hand, any number can get a double roll anytime, which makes blocking a player with a 3-for-1 board not as quite as effective. So here we have them, 12 tips if you exclude the bonus one. I hope they will help. If you're interested in more videos like this one, I recommend subscribing to the channel, because I have a lot of Settlers of Catan tips on my channel. For example, the video about placements I've mentioned, or this video with 9 tips which can be applied every single game. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you see me on the next one. Cheers!